For decades, Step 1 was the single most dreaded exam in all of medical education. You thought the MCAT was brutal? Step 1 made it look like a warm-up. For many students, preparation started nearly a year in advance. Months of steady buildup that eventually culminate in 2 to 3 months of intense full-time studying. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Your future compressed into a 3-digit number. The toll was enormous. Students' mental health deteriorated. Burnout was rampant, and the calls for change grew louder and louder. Then, in 2020, the announcement came. Step 1 would go pass-fail. The announcement sparked an immediate and heated debate. Online medical forums erupted. Twitter threads multiplied. Students, residents, and physicians argued that making Step 1 pass-fail would finally address burnout, improve mental health, and fix a broken system. Deans and institutions echoed similar hopes. Students exhaled for the first time in years. Except, there were a few voices, ours included, saying, "Hold on, you're confusing the symptom with the cause. Step 1 wasn't the disease, it was a thermometer measuring a much deeper problem, and removing the thermometer doesn't cure the fever." 3 years later, the data are in, and it tells a very different story than the one everyone expected. So, was turning Step 1 pass-fail a mistake? Dr. Jubal, MedSchoolInsiders.com. To understand how this went wrong, you need to understand what Step 1 actually did. Before it went pass-fail in 2022, Step 1 was a single, high-stakes exam taken between second and third year. It tested foundational medical knowledge, but more importantly, it functioned as a sorting tool. A higher Step 1 score shaped which specialties you could realistically pursue, which programs would consider your application, and how early you could gauge your own competitiveness. For better or worse, you knew where you stood. Residency programs face overwhelming application volume. They need fast, standardized filters just to function. Step 1 filled that role for decades. When critics argued that too much weight was being placed on a single test, the logic behind pass-fail seemed straightforward. Remove numeric scores and reduce pressure. But as we argued when the pass-fail change was announced, the pressure wouldn't disappear, it would shift to other signals. The intention behind pass-fail was to reduce stress, but the debate missed a bigger question. What happens to the rest of the system when you remove one of its primary filters? You can actually check out those videos and articles from back in 2020 linked in the description. Making Step 1 pass-fail didn't change the stakes or how competitive programs are. It threw away your backup score. Mess up Step 1 in the past, you could make real improvement on Step 2 CK. Mess up Step 2 CK now, that's your only shot. So what actually happened? Pass rates dropped by about 5 to 7 percentage points with a larger decline among DO students. Before pass-fail, US MD students had pass rates around 95 to 97%. By 2023 and 2024, that dropped to roughly 89 to 91%. That means about 1 in 10 MD students now fail Step 1 compared to roughly 1 in 20 before. For DO students, the decline was steeper. Pass rates fell from the low 90s into the mid to high 80s, a drop of about 6 to 8 percentage points. What changed? Lower stakes change behavior. When an exam feels less impactful, preparation becomes more variable. Some students still over-prepare, others pull back, and that variability increases the risk of failure at the margins. Removing the incentive to excel also removed the buffer against failing.
And there's another factor most students don't consider. On the exact same day Step 1 went pass-fail, the US MLE raised the minimum passing score from 194 to 196. So students were preparing less intensely for an exam that had actually become harder to pass. Less preparation, higher bar, same day. The result was predictable.
But what's worse is that the stress didn't disappear. Recent studies of students approaching Step 1 in the pass-fail era still show high levels of anxiety and poor sleep. Even without a numeric score, Step 1 remains a major psychological stressor. So the experience didn't become calm or low pressure, it just changed shape. There were 2 major pressure shifts. The first is the most obvious. Step 2 CK has become the primary numeric test score differentiator in residency selection. Scores didn't suddenly rise faster after 2022. They were already trending upward. What changed is how heavily programs depended on them. The timing of Step 2 didn't change either. Step 2 CK is still taken after your third-year clinical rotations, usually with a short dedicated study period. But that means much of your studying is overlapping with long work hours, evaluations, evaluations, and residency applications. That concentrates more pressure into a single exam during one of the busiest periods of medical school. When Step 1 became pass-fail, many students reallocated their time. Some pulled back on Step 1 prep and spent more time on research and extracurriculars. For some students, that shift meant less consistent Step 1 preparation, increasing the risk of failing. Meanwhile, residency programs didn't stop needing filters. They still have to sift through thousands of applications. Removing one numeric metric didn't eliminate the need for sorting. It meant programs leaned more heavily on the remaining ones. Now there's more pressure on a single exam with no backup test to offset a weak Step 2 performance. This translates into fewer opportunities to recover and more downstream consequences from a single bad outcome. Knowing what matters isn't the same as knowing how to prepare for it. Many students hit a plateau, let's say 230, 235, 245, grinding through more and more practice questions and content review, hoping their score will eventually climb. It won't, not without changing the approach. When Step 1 was still numerically scored, most students didn't spend months studying for Step 2 CK. Dedicated periods were often only a few weeks long. I studied for 3.5 weeks and scored a 269. Students today are spending multiple months and not hitting that number. The difference isn't intelligence or effort, it comes down to 3 pillars that most people don't fully understand: content knowledge, study strategies, and test-taking skills. I'm breaking these down in detail over on the Med School Insider's Blueprint channel, where we dig into the strategies that actually move the needle based on our experience helping over 10,000 students succeed. Link in the description. But here's the short version. Almost everyone over-indexes on content knowledge, sticking to more questions, more review, more memorization. That's something you can largely do on your own time, and yes, we can help clarify things when students are confused on tougher topics, but that alone isn't what moves the needle quickly. What actually causes the biggest score improvements are the other 2 pillars. Better study strategies feed directly into content knowledge, so you're learning more efficiently without grinding harder. In other words, learning faster and forgetting slower. But the real lowest hanging fruit? Test-taking skills. This is where students leave the most points on the table, and it's an area almost no one optimizes properly. It's knowing how to approach a question when the answer isn't immediately obvious, how to eliminate choices strategically, how to make better guesses when you're unsure, how to read questions with intent instead of reacting to surface details, and how to manage pacing so you never run out of time. If you want help identifying which of those 3 pillars is holding you back and how to increase your score in the quickest way possible, hop on a free strategy call using the link in the description, and we'll talk about whether or not you're a good fit for our program. So what was the next major pressure shift? Research didn't suddenly matter after Step 1 went pass-fail. It was already increasing, but the slope changed dramatically.
Look at the NRMP charting outcomes data. In neurosurgery, MAShed applicants averaged 23.4 research items in 2020. By 2022, that climbed to 25.5. But from 2022 to 2024, it jumped to 37.4. That's nearly a 12-item increase in half the time. This isn't gradual inflation. This is an arms race.
We're expecting to see these numbers increase again when detailed match data is released in 2026. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel for our updated ranking videos on competitiveness, research items, and Step 2 scores. When Step 1 scores were removed, residency programs didn't suddenly become holistic. They still needed ways to filter thousands of applications. They had fewer early objective signals, so research output became one of the remaining measurable differentiators. As a result, incentives shifted. Research became more heavily weighted, and the system began rewarding the countable output of research items, including abstracts, presentations, and publications, over depth alone. These specialties were already in a different tier, but after 2022, the gap widened fast. If you're aiming for one of these fields, the research expectation isn't optional, it's table stakes. Now, some of you might be thinking, didn't ERAS just change how research is reported? Starting with the 2027 cycle, ERAS is replacing the traditional publication section with a new scholarly work section. It introduces clearer categories, lets applicants designate select items as most meaningful, and is designed to shift emphasis from sheer volume to substance and depth of contribution. A lot of students are hearing this and assuming research item counts are gonna drop. I don't think that's what's gonna happen. By the time I graduated from medical school, I had more than 60 research items, including 29 publications. Even with the new ERAS structure, if you're doing research properly and strategically, your numbers shouldn't actually decrease. There are ways to maintain and even increase your output while also meeting the new emphasis on meaningful contributions. The students who understand how the system works will adapt. The ones who don't will fall behind. Because here's what hasn't changed. Residency programs aren't reading every paper. They use their own algorithms to assign each candidate a research score. They're using research items as proxies for academic engagement and productivity. Authorship position, publication type, journal relevance and impact factor, and other variables are all factored in. It's a fast way to sort large applicant pools, especially now that Step 1 is pass-fail, and more weight has shifted to Step 2 CK and research. The new format may change how that information is presented, but it doesn't change the underlying incentive. Let me know in the comments if you want me to do a deep dive on how we optimize research strategy with our students. So, was making Step 1 pass-fail a mistake? The original promise was reduced stress, but burnout and anxiety persist because burnout was never primarily about Step 1. What actually changed was how students are evaluated, not the competitiveness of residency. There's less clarity on where students stand, fewer objective benchmarks, and less time to adjust once signals appear. The real issue is a structural bottleneck, and this gets to the core issue. Competitive things are competitive, and if you change something to pass-fail, that doesn't make the end goal of residency any less competitive. It just changes the metrics by which you play the game. Residency didn't become less competitive when Step 1 went pass-fail. The competition shifted to different signals. Ones that show up later carry higher stakes and are harder to recover from. When we talk about data-backed competitiveness, the most competitive specialties consistently cluster at the top. Dermatology, plastic surgery, orthopedic surgery, neurosurgery, and ENT stand clearly above the rest in terms of applicant pressure, score expectations, and research volume. Other specialties like radiology, radiation oncology, and anesthesiology are competitive, but they're not in the same tier as those top 5 when you look at objective match data. Meanwhile, specialties like family medicine and pediatrics generally face less intense screening pressure because their supply-demand dynamics differ fundamentally. This distinction matters because competition in medicine isn't abstract, it's driven by incentives. Where demand far exceeds supply, programs will always rely on hard filters, regardless of whether Step 1 is scored or pass-fail. Programs must filter. Application volume makes a detailed review impossible. And when one signal is removed, others take its place. A lackluster Step 2 CK score is now much harder to recover from. Research output carries far more weight, and programs lean more heavily on clerkship grades, letters of recommendation, and institutional familiarity to sort applicants at scale. With all that said, what should students do now? Take Step 1 seriously, even though it's pass-fail. It's all about finding the right balance. Investing too much energy into Step 1 puts you at a disadvantage because while you're hyper-focused on Step 1, other students are gaining research experience and publications. Aim for a score that puts you well beyond the danger zone, but don't over-prep at the expense of the rest of your application. Step 1's change to pass-fail didn't ease stress. It changed how students are filtered. Early clarity was replaced with later, higher-stakes signals. The pressure didn't disappear, it concentrated. Treat Step 2 CK as the primary test score in residency screening. Be intentional with research and start early. Focus on experiences that actually mean something, not just checking boxes. And take the time to understand how the specialties you're considering actually evaluate applicants, including what Step 2 scores are typically expected. If you're wondering where you actually stand for the specialties that you're considering, plug in your stats at specialtypredictor.com to see your odds of matching based on the latest official NRMP data.